Mbali, a very good evening to you. Thank you for speaking to us. So you have given the MECs in KwaZulu-Natal, along with the Premier, an average score, a D average score. How did you arrive at that?
Thank you, and thank you very much for having me. We arrived at the score by taking, obviously, the average of what was rated of each MEC. Some of them got E's, F's, C's, and D's. And this is really based on their performance over the last few months that they've had these portfolios. Some of them have been lucky that they've inherited portfolios which were relatively in stable conditions, but some of them have really made some of their portfolios worse. And I'll single out the MEC of Education, KwaZulu-Natal, who has tried to do some good, but has been embroiled in a scandal where he's basically, along with his officials, defrauded the departments because of what we call car gates, where he's basically been hiring a car that is worth, millions of rands, more than it should be. And then, of course, the most senior person to get the worst score is the Premier, Sitla Zigalala, who was given an E score on his scorecard for really failing to be able to get the province to be able to get forward, to be accountable, and to move in a direction that can take KZN people forward. And there's other MECs, like the KZN MEC. There's only been one clean audit in the whole province. And even with that, and even with the AG really giving great recommendations in the past year, has not been able to come up with an APP that really speaks to the issues of KZN or speaks to being able to remedy some of the real problems that we see in our municipalities, whether fiscal or administrative. And we really feel that with the amount of time they've had, they really haven't stepped up to the plate to show that there's any real movement they're going to take going forward. And in every case that there's been accountability issues, they haven't been able to act. And so really, that's what we've decided that they deserve, is a D scorecard at this point.
I'm glad you mentioned the amount of time, because yes, KZN has some very real issues to deal with. But as you say, we had an election in May. Some of these MECs have only been in office from about June, really. So 6 months on, is it fair really to be making an assessment where you're scoring them on performance in the way that you've done? It sounds to some extent like just a political gimmick, if not just grandstanding.
That would be the case if they had no influence on some of the APPs and the plans that they have for their departments going forward. And I'll give you some classic examples, such as education, health, and COCTA. So at the beginning of the year, obviously they would not have had any ability to do anything about the APPs or the plans going forward. But after May, we all partook in budgetary, performance plan assessments, and assessments that were able to say what we could do going forward. And what we found in the adjustment period that's just happened just now, in the last 3 or 4 weeks of the year, suddenly we've seen the budgets adjusted to show different projections for the medium-term plan, which is 3 years, showing either salary increases or things that we thought we'd all agreed to earlier in the year, but have now been changed completely. And that shows that these are departments that have not been faithful in the way that they have decided to actually roll out their plans. So one, they are not sticking to their own APPs, whether or not they were made or sustained by the current MECs. And secondly, they've made adjustments to all of their budgets, which take away money from crucial things like education and health to put them into things like the remuneration of izindunas or other. Yes, thank you. Yes, remuneration of izinduna and other things that haven't been budgeted for. And also, obviously, the public wage bill that is ballooning every year. And what this shows is that it's a department that's willing to play ball with the government and really try to negotiate things that have already been planned for and say, you know what, this is not important. And particularly for COCTA, The disaster management bill is something that's happened. And if you've been in KZN, you would have seen the floods, you would have seen the amount of torrential rain we're having, and you will know that the poorest of the poor people now do not have the ability to even look to the government
Mbali,
to help them in terms of any disaster relief.
We're racing against the clock. All the things you've listed are quite valid, but the reality is the DA is not in power in KZN. So, and what you're saying also is information that has been widely shared, a lack of accountability, poor governance, as you say, pretty much general knowledge. So what is the point of this scorecard if it's not going to bring about any real change?
Well, you know, it's difficult being in a position because we have to box in an arena where right now, particularly in KZN, we don't have the power to change things. But it's quite clear, given that there's no other opposition party, even the official opposition party that's willing to raise these matters, that we have to box above our weight and we have to show and really outline to the public what's going wrong. And so it sounds repetitive, it sounds boring, and it sounds like we're just saying the same thing. But until people understand how serious the severity of these issues are, that's what we have to keep doing. I'd love to tell you something different, but I'm not in a position to because, unfortunately, I'm in opposition.
Okay.
Hopefully not for
Let me
much
ask you this then, Mbali, and hopefully you can answer this in much more detail. You are giving a scorecard here on a group of MECs who are part of the ANC, right? And in your assessment of the Premier Sihle Zikalala in particular, you are referring to him as divisive, unable to bring together the running of the city, especially between the parties. But some would say it's very rich of the DA to be judging anyone on division and an inability to be coherent when your party, the DA, at national level, even in provinces like Gauteng, is at risk precisely because of that reason. So perhaps take the speck out of your eye?
Look, I'm not going to deny the fact that my party has to get better at playing nice with other parties in some respects. I think that we must stick to principles when we can. But certainly in KZN, with a party that's had this long to be in a position to make differences, we haven't seen any real change. And so we definitely can point out the fact that they have not been able to play and do what they were supposed to do, even when they have the full power. I understand our positions where we haven't had the full power and maybe we've not been as able to extend the warmth to other parties in terms of bringing them to the table. But the ANC has no real excuse in this province. But I do take your points, and I do think that it's something the DA certainly has to work on.
So you think there's a valid point to be made by people who read this and say it's very rich coming from the DA, especially in its current state?
I don't agree with that, but I do, as I say, agree that the DA needs to work on how it encounters and delves into coalition or co-governance agreements going forward. And I think that's the future of where the country's going. The ANC doesn't have that problem in the province, and so they really are doing as much and anything that they want to do, so there should be nothing hindering them, and that's the difference in those two cases. But I will not deny that the DA has a lot of work to do.
Mbali Ntuli from the DA in KZN, thank you so much for being on Nightline tonight.